Good evening. Welcome to the candidate forum for the Illinois 100. Again, I'll start over again. Good evening. Welcome to the candidate forum for the Illinois 115th Legislative District, hosted by the League of Women Voters of Jackson County and provided technological expertise for us by the Carbondale Public Library. And a special thanks goes to Jennifer Robertson. I'm Dorsey Prosser and will be the moderator for this evening. And the League of Women Voters, a primary goal we have is to encourage the informed and active participation of citizens in government. And that's what we hope is accomplished here tonight. And so before we get started with tonight's event, I will remind you of your options for voting in the upcoming election. Be sure you have a plan to vote. You can vote by mail. It's a two-step process here in Illinois and Jackson County. If you haven't already applied to vote by mail, and you may still do that and contact the county clerk. In this two-step process, you'll apply, and then you will be sent a ballot by the county clerk. Early voting is being offered at the Carbondale Civic Center, SIU Student Center, and at the Jackson County Clerk's office. Go ahead and check the county clerk's website for specific times and dates. And of course, as always, you can go to your local polling place on November 3rd. So I want to thank you for coming to hear the views of those vying for the 115th district. This is the seat that's being vacated by Representative Terry Bryant. That's the 115th district. 3 candidates are vying for this seat. All 3 were invited. One of the candidates, Ian Peak, he first confirmed that he would attend, but he has not followed up in any of our additional follow-up correspondence. So he is not with us tonight, but thank you to the 2 candidates that are. Let me introduce them to you. We have Randy Auksher and Paul Jacobs. Thank you, candidates, for coming tonight. Here's the forum for this evening. The candidates will have 1.5 minutes for every question that is asked. Candidates, keep your eyes on the timer. You'll see a yellow card when there's 15 seconds left and a stop sign when you're supposed to conclude your remarks. You do not need to stop mid-sentence. Go ahead and complete your thoughts and complete your thoughts as quickly as possible. All right, so all candidates will get the same question and the order in which they get the question will rotate between the 2 candidates. Candidates, feel free to ask me to repeat the questions. Candidates, do you have any further questions? If not, I'll go forward. Thank you. And we'll go alphabetically. So let me give you the first question. Please introduce yourself and include information about life experiences that have prepared you for the office of state representative. Please note what distinguishes you from the other candidates. Mr. Auksher?
Thank you, Dorsey. Sure. I was born in Kentucky and grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. I went to the city schools there during the desegregation of the public schools in Memphis. It had a permanent and indelible effect on the way I see the world. Finishing high school, I went on to what was then called Memphis State University. It's now called the University of Memphis. And over the course of about 9 years, I off and on played music for a living and went back to school and played music and went back to school. I still alternate between playing music out around the Carbondale region and teaching school. I liked school so much that I really never left. I went to graduate school at Emory University in Atlanta, completing PhD in philosophy in 1992. And then my first professoring job was in Oklahoma City at Oklahoma City University. I was there for 8 years and was very fortunate to get the position at SIU Carbondale in the philosophy department in the year 2000. Very happy to move to Illinois. I had visited Carbondale when I was looking for a graduate school, and I was very happy to move here. I've been here ever since. I live in Murfreesboro, and I love it here in Murfreesboro, and I love it in Southern Illinois, and that is part of the reason I want to run. I think that the differences between me and Mr. Jacobs will be evident enough as time goes on, but I identify as a progressive I do consider myself a progressive conservative, but that's in a very broad sense of the word conservative. And so we could talk about that if we wanted. I have a feeling yet that there is quite a lot of common ground between.
Thank you, Mr. Officer. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Jacobs?
Well, I am Dr. Paul Jacobs, the Republican nominee for the 115th state representative position. I have been in an optometric practice for over 40 years. I also started one of the first wineries almost 25 years ago. I had other successful businesses and have created hundreds of jobs for Illinoisans. You know, my wife, Rhoda, and I have raised all four of our children here in Southern Illinois, specifically in God's country, Pomona. And, you know, they all went through the university systems here. They went through Illinois schools. They went through SIU. They went to U of I. Every one of them has been trained by Illinois teachers. Please understand, we are vested heavily here in Southern Illinois. We are not going anywhere. I need to help control the exorbitant increase in taxes and stop the outmigration of Illinois residents. I want to work toward a truly balanced budget. I want to realize that government should not, and realistically, it can't do everything. Government action and oversight must be balanced with individual responsibility. Think of this. Why did taxes go up? The simplest reason is elected representatives respond to the constituents who are requesting more and more services. I think it's the duty of the representatives to go through their districts, build businesses, and therefore jobs to create larger tax bases instead of taxing to the point that Illinoisans are voting with their feet and leaving. I want to make it easier for businesses to open and prosper here in Southern Illinois. As long-time business owner, balancing a budget every month, and an optometric physician, an old Navy veteran, I will continue to fight for Southern Illinois communities.
Okay. Thank you. All right. The second question. In light of recent scandals involving Illinois legislators, what sort of ethics reform or other actions would you support? We'll begin with Mr. Jacobs.
Yes. Ethics reform is extremely near and dear, I think. There's a bill right now before the legislators that is called the Public Servant Trust and Accountability Act. It's going to do a number of different things. One, it's going to try to end the conflicts of interest. It's going to ban lobbying for any of the legislators for 3 years. Right now, they can actually retire or just finish their term and become a lobbyist. I think it's ridiculous. Legislators can't lobby with the new law. Right now, a legislator can be a lobbyist as they're working for us. It also increases economic disclosure. So if you have some things that could be used against you economically, it's disclosed. It also now it's going to hold lawmakers more accountable. It creates an independent inspector general that is going to strengthen the laws. The inspector general can go back and look at the economic disclosures. The more that you have conflict of interest laws presented, it will create very possibly more recusals. If, for instance, like I used to own my winery, I don't own it now, but if I had a bill that was coming up, had to do with licensing of wineries, I could recuse myself or may be required by law to recuse myself. PACs cannot fund criminal defense. And there are some structural reforms, no COLAs for lawmakers. I think that's great. If you have a bipartisan bill, 5 bipartisan sponsors, that bill no longer gets cut. It is going to be pulled out of the Rules Committee and it will be voted on. And then they're also having term limits.
Thank you. Mr. Oxshire, ethics reform.
I agree with everything that Mr. Jacobs just said and would support the bill as well. I want to add some things that perhaps would, I'm not sure if Mr. Jacobs would agree with this part, but I am in complete agreement with everything he just said, and I would support the bill. As a state employee, I have gone through the ethics training ever since it was instituted, and so every year I've watched the evolution of the ethics laws in the state of Illinois. I have to say that right now the ethics codes and the laws are reactive, which is to say you can see looking at the code that they pass a rule only after someone does something wrong, and then it comes to be prohibited along the way. And so the ethics code currently is a kind of a hodgepodge, which reads as a sort of an archaeological record of corruption and misdoing by our former state, especially in government and the government leadership, but also other kinds of state employees. And so right at the moment, it doesn't make overall sense, and it does not, in fact, have a sort of a coherent moral code. Since ethics is one of my specialties as a philosophy professor, I would like to see a complete code that makes moral sense, and I would like to contribute to writing such a code. And so right at the moment, the OEIG as well is not functioning very well, in my opinion. I've had interaction with them, and so there's some work to be done there as well.
Thank you. All right. Next question, given the significant economic impact of Southern Illinois University at Carbondale, what are your strategies to preserve and promote this vital economic engine? Mr. Auksher.
Obviously, this is my place of employment, and it has been possible for me to study very closely what has gone right and what has gone wrong at this particular university over the course of the last 20 years. And so my ideas and my plans would be very detailed, but I can say this: a certain amount of consolidation of the university systems in Illinois is, I think, something that cannot be avoided. The trick for the future is to see to it that this consolidation happens in such a way that we retain a vital and autonomous voice when it comes to our place in the state system. And so I have some ideas and some plans that I won't go into about how I think that sort of thing would happen. I believe the turnover in leadership, in the top leadership positions at SIUC, has been terribly detrimental to not only the morale on campus, but to getting any kind of firm plan in place that leads this university forward. But I'm very optimistic about the current leadership, and the faculty, it seems to me, has high morale. The enrollment problem seems to be turning around, and I think that as a state legislator, I can do a lot to work with the leadership at SIUC to see to it that going into the future, what happens with higher education in Illinois, we make the best of it for SIUC.
Thank you. Mr. Jacobs, SIU.
Well, I'm not quite as rosy on SIU's future. I think that it can be fixed. You know, we're lucky if we have 7,000 or 8,000 students this year. It's a long cry from the 26,000 we had, you know, a few short years ago. But I do think the way they approach everything is when there are cuts. They cut across the board because everybody wants to be fair. Well, they need to go where they're making money. They're making money in 4-year degrees. They're making money in med school. They're making money in law. And they're making money in the automotive and aviation. They need to not cut those parts. When they begin to cut back and have fewer people teaching, you need to keep that group going. They also are cutting the ag department and making it, they're going into another group. Ag is the biggest business we have in Illinois, totally. What we need to do is put more money into ag, attract more people to ag. And I think you could build up just an ag, automotive, aviation, et cetera. You know, it's just one of those things. You have to do recruiting, and you have to recruit in the places where you're really strong. And I think we can do that.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, what can the legislature do to combat the opioid and meth crises in Illinois? What can the legislature do? Mr. Jacobs.
Well, the opioids, you know, I don't think legislators are going to be able to do as much as possibly it boils down to family values. We have to realize that we have addictive personalities in every family. We also have to start early with our parents, our pastors, our priests, our society has to try to rid the problems that these kids have as they're growing up, get the worry and the angst away from them. The world is a tough place to grow up. The war on drugs many times is said, well, it's not working. because we have just as many people in the penitentiaries now as we did when we first started the war on drugs. Well, I think that it does work as a deterrent. I think there's an awful lot of people that don't do drugs because they don't want to go to prison. But we have to look at the 62,000 opioid deaths that we've had every year now for the last few years. That means they've been addicted, and we've got to work with that. And that's a legal prescription. So after addiction, we have to deal with the complete transformation, get those people back to normal. We have wonderful places here. We have Gateway, we have Recover US or Recover Us. It is, both places are using drugs and counseling to get people off of drugs and back into society. Recover Us has a new device that actually is taped to the ear, and it feeds back into the brain, and it gets rid of the alcohol wish and the opioid wish. Now you have more trouble with meth addiction. You know, they get the big high and they want the big high over and over. That big high, they don't have drugs for it, but they are finding that they can use the drugs that they're using for alcohol and for the opioid addiction. So I think that we've counseling and places like Gateway and Recover Us.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Oxshire, what can the legislature do about the opioid and meth crises? Your opinion?
I certainly agree with Mr. Jacobs that treatment is preferable to incarceration, and that incarceration, even though it may deter some people, the addiction is stronger than the deterrent. I believe we have ample evidence over the last years that that's the case. But I do think that the legislature can go after big pharma and can make sure that at least at the level of the incentivizing of prescribing opioids, that the incentive that big pharmaceutical companies give to doctors to pass these prescriptions along to people, which is basically how opioid addiction usually starts. I mean, when we're in pain, we want painkillers for sure. But the thing about it is that the big pharmaceutical companies have made it very attractive for doctors to prescribe these things. And I think that going after the doctors is probably not the best idea. Going after the big pharmaceutical companies is the better idea when it comes to fixing that. I agree with Mr. Jacobs about the difficulty with methamphetamine, because the big high is extremely difficult to combat. And I also agree with him that starting in the home, in the church, in the places where people grow up is the best way to combat that problem. On the other hand, I would say that decriminalizing the addiction without decriminalizing the illegal sale is probably the best option.
Thank you. All right, the next question's a little bit longer, but basically it's about the Illinois budget. Here we go. According to the Comptroller's Office, the state has run a deficit in its general fund every year, at least since 1986. What are your proposals for addressing the ongoing challenges of the Illinois budget? If you recommend cuts, please be specific as to what cuts or reductions you recommend. If you recommend increasing revenue, again, please be specific as to what areas should be increased. We will start with Mr. Oxshire.
Here, I think we're going to find a fairly significant difference between Mr. Jacobs and me. And so I'll just say right off that I favor the progressive tax, and I hope we're going to talk about taxes more. But the progressive tax is different from the amendment to the Illinois Constitution. The amendment, which I also support, simply moves the authority of taxation from the Constitution to the legislature. I don't trust the legislature any more than anyone in Illinois does. But I can say this: the current system is not working. And if we amend the Constitution, we can then have a very serious discussion as to how to reform taxes in Illinois. Right now, because of the flat tax, every single thing you do gets taxed so that the state can get enough revenue to develop its and deliver its services. That isn't working. It isn't working for any of us. And perhaps Mr. Jacobs and I do agree on the fact that it isn't working. I favor also the LaSalle Street tax, which is a very small tax on transactions in the commodities markets in Chicago The typical contract exchange is over $200,000, and I favor a tax of $1 to $2 on these exchanges, not even noticeable to the people who will be making these exchanges, will not be a deterrent to business, but can raise well over $1 billion for the state. And it begins to address the budget crisis.
Thank you. Mr. Jacobs?
Well, I'm the no tax guy, so I disagree with most of the taxation period, but specifically the budget, concerning the budget and what we can do with the budget this year was put in $2 billion more than it was last time. And last time we didn't have the money to do the $2 billion more that it put in that time. So every year it's $2 billion more, $2 billion more. We've got $9 billion in unpaid bills that go to all of the people that are supplying us, Illinoisans, all of the state, house, everywhere. And we have $9 billion in unpaid bills. Our general revenue before COVID was $6 billion under the expenditures that we have. I tell you, the only thing you can do is reduce spending, and you can reduce spending everywhere. There's not an agency in the government that doesn't waste many percentages of many millions and millions of dollars of what they have. You can cut, and you have to cut. And with COVID, we're going to have to definitely cut. But during my tenure, I would prefer to reduce taxes even more. And actually, if we can't do that, at least maintain the current level. But without tax stopping and without the spending stopping and reducing it, we're not going to be able to get anywhere.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next question is sort of our environmental question. What is your view of the Clean Energy Jobs Act? It was proposed in 2019. It's kind of languishing here during COVID times. Clean Energy Jobs Act. If you're not familiar with the specifics of that proposed legislation, perhaps you could share your views on the legislature's responsibility or the legislature's participation in promoting clean energy and the jobs that go along with these industries. Right, Mr. Jacobs.
Well, you know, for the most part, I think that we're dealing with the solar issues, wind turbines issues, tidal electricity, hydroelectric electricity. I think that all of those things, we need basically an all of the above approach. I don't think that we're going to be able to get out of coal as quickly as they think that they're going to be able to get out of coal. We have to have some decent energy to plug into our grids, the electric grids. I mean, we're getting ready to have 2 nuclear power plants come off the line in the state of Illinois. That is going to be a problem, and it may even create some brownouts or some, hopefully only brownouts. But if you spend some money on keeping everybody working, I think you can do just fine. The biggest problem we have, I don't think that as much money as is very likely to be made with solar and with all the other industries that are green, there's not a businessman out there that's not going to be able to ante up and go ahead and see the benefit of those particular businesses. They will come in with money. I don't think it should be taxed. I don't think that taxes should be spent on that particular thing. I just don't agree with it. I think that nuclear power is really a good way to go, but we're not going to be able to see nuclear power plants built for probably ever. And the coal, you know, it's a temporary thing, but I think that you need that coal just to keep us going.
Thank you. Mr. Oxshire?
Yes, obviously being a member of the Green Party, I have, it's near and dear to my heart, the clean energy issue, generally speaking. The legislation, I think, needs some work, but I'll speak in general terms about it. I think that the tax credit that Illinois has offered for individual homeowners to go solar has really worked, and it has created a lot of jobs in Southern Illinois in particular, but across the state. And in fact, my house went solar this summer as a result of that tax credit. Had that tax credit not been available, we wouldn't have been able to afford that. But as we are looking at trying to reduce our expenses for retirement. I know we're in the same position as many, many other people. And as Mr. Jacobs mentioned, of course, small business owners and medium-sized businesses, the idea of saving the kind of money on energy that I am now looking at saving in my own home is going to make it possible for me to live a lot better in retirement than I otherwise would have. I'm not a wealthy person, and so as this, I think there's no doubt that this legislation has hit home. It needs to be extended, and we need to see what else we can do in order to motivate small business owners, medium-sized businesses, and individual homeowners to do as much as they can afford to do. And the tax credit, as opposed to the use of tax dollars, is, I think, a better alternative than using tax money to do this. So I would agree with Mr. Jacobs about that part. So clean energy, absolutely.
Thank you. What should the Illinois legislature do to help citizens deal with the economic and health challenges of COVID-19? Mr. Aksher?
I believe that Illinois probably has done better than most of our neighboring states in handling the crisis. I actually think that the governor's plan of dividing up the state into its zones and keeping close records has really helped. It also helped when slowly, far too slowly, the grants came through to places like SIU. We got $2.8 million a couple of weeks ago, finally, to upgrade our testing. What we did in Illinois was we set up a state-of-the-art testing and back-to-school program at the University of Illinois that people all over the country are copying. And so the decision to try to model a program and then spread it to the rest of the state was one of the ways they handled it. I don't believe that that has turned out to be a bad decision, even though we were flying in the dark at the other universities. Similar sorts of things are going on with regard to elementary school and secondary school and the gradual reopening of businesses. It is true that in Illinois, just like every other state, what has happened is that as COVID decreased in the cities, it moved out and increased in the countryside. And so we are experiencing the same thing as it has happened in other countries as well. It happened in Germany, it's happened in Italy, that COVID has now moved out into the countryside. And so I think we should see the increase in our local COVID cases as being pretty much in keeping with the way that the disease has progressed. So we've done all right, in my opinion.
Thanks. Mr. Jacobs?
Well, the whole premise is based on the facts being facts. And, you know, you come across something like last Monday that the Metro East is being shut down based on facts that aren't facts. Most people in Metro East go to Barnes for their health care. They go to all the hospitals throughout St. Louis for their health care. And our health departments in the state were not getting the negative COVID testing from Barnes or from any of the other hospitals there. So actually, you question whether or not the 8%, 9% that they hit Metro East with is actually even factual, and it isn't. And right now, our health departments are still not going to pick it up. They're still going ahead and have restaurants not open, bars not open. It's killing businesses. It's estimated a couple of weeks ago we had 6,000 businesses that have shuttered, and they're gone. They're not going to be coming back. You can't kill the economy and expect from false reporting that you're doing a really good job. The biggest problem we have right now is we have one executive that is doing for 8 months, has been doing all of the decisions. We need a bill that will go in and declare what we really need to do in a 30-day emergency period. The executive power is listed, but it needs to be defined very carefully. There's no way that you and me, everybody that voted for the representatives or their senators, didn't have the right to have them go up and also get in session and help decide with the governor what we should do for the state. They may have decided to do exactly the same thing, but the people that voted for the representatives and the senators can at least call our offices and gripe. They want this done, this done, this done. My business is going to pot. Please do something. You're not going to get recognized as the governors.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Next question's about small business and jobs. So we often hear that small business promotes jobs and economic development. What do you think the legislature should do to support small business in the 115th district? Mr. Jacobs.
Small businesses should be supported in every district. We need small businesses, period. Right now, you know, even though we're kind of doom and gloom with the COVID, I think that there is a good chance that if the state begins to reduce taxes rather than increase corporate taxes, every state around us is reducing corporate taxes. If the state begins to reduce corporate taxes, and they don't get the progressive tax passed, because that's going to increase in S corps, you're going to be 47-50% increases on small businesses. So you're going to do exactly the wrong thing. But if you can get the businesses to open, you're going to be better. But there's, like I said, 6,000 are not going to open, but it's going to open up a group of entrepreneurs, a bunch of younger entrepreneurs that are going to be able to come in and look at the benefit of buying these very inexpensive properties, and very possibly if the government doesn't tax them to death, there will be a renaissance in the state. I truly do believe that. But small business is the absolute method to do it. Taxing it is not the way to do it.
Thank you. Mr. Oxshire?
This is a really huge subject, and like Mr. Jacobs, I think everything possible should be done to support small business, but I think we have different ideas about how. I agree with Mr. Jacobs that we have punished our small businesses with the wrong kinds of taxes, but I think that economic development it's got to be a public-private partnership, and I believe that what we need to do is develop the infrastructure that makes small businesses viable for our region. And in particular, I would point out that cheap mass transportation is the most important piece of that. If you go to my website, which is randyoxshire.net, you'll find a video there that me and some friends made about how we could get trains to and from the Metro East down here very, very cheaply. And around all of the platforms that those trains would pick up and deliver passengers, you would find the opportunity to develop small businesses in the walking downtowns that still exist in places like Coulterville and Tilden and Pinckneyville and DuQuoin and Murfreesboro and Carbondale. And so getting that mass transportation is a key part of it. I also have to say that workman's compensation has to be reformed. It's just not, we're not going to, everybody is working as a private contractor for somebody else in order to avoid the overhead and the expense of not only workman's compensation, but other state regulations that have really made it, it's a disincentive to starting small businesses. And so that needs major reform.
Thank you. The next question is about gun regulation as it specifically pertains to Illinois state law. So please share your views on automatic weapons, open carry, red flag laws, and explain why you advocate these views. Mr. Oxshire?
I have always thought that this debate being carried out at the national level with all of this, the millions of dollars spent on both sides, was missing the point. This is not so much about the Second Amendment and well-armed and well-ordered militias. This is about local control. I think that the county is the proper level for things to be determined, and that the sheriff's office is the proper agency, because it's an elective office, to determine how the gun question is handled from community to community, county to county. Granted, guns move back and forth, and this does pose certain challenges, but having a big, expensive argument about the Second Amendment isn't getting us anywhere in Southern Illinois. We are going to have guns in Southern Illinois because the people of Southern Illinois like to go hunting, and they are strong supporters of the Second Amendment. My personal opinion doesn't make that much difference, because I'm certainly not going to do anything to try to take guns away from people. With that said, I do not see the point in having assault weapons and guns whose only purpose is to kill mass numbers of human beings. That does strike me as something that the state should rightly regulate. But with regard to the rest of the guns, leave it to local control.
Thank you. Mr. Jacobs?
Yes. Well, concerning some of the weapons of choice, first of all, Johns Hopkins just came out with a study that showed that there was absolutely no correlation between mass shootings and automatic weapons. And automatic weapons were outlawed in 1934. So I don't think that we can use that argument. I think that the Second Amendment was not designed for hunting. The Second Amendment was created by men and women that were in tyrannical situations in Europe. They came to the United States, they made the United States, and they decided, you know what, we need to have weapons to protect ourselves, the populace, from the tyrannical governments. That's where the difference in how the Second Amendment is read by people, and that's what it means. It is strictly for our protection. Hunting has absolutely nothing to do with the Second Amendment.
Okay, thank you. What can the legislature do to address violent crime in Illinois? Mr. Jacobs?
No. The violent crime, if you're speaking of gun crime, I'm not sure which crime you're talking about. Just knifing each other. I don't know if you can be more specific. If you're talking about guns, which I guess we're doing that, so we'll do that. The thing you have to remember, the weapons of choice are generally illegal when they're being used illegally. Also, most people that are using guns are under 21 years of age. It goes pretty much back to family values. It goes back to conflict, learning how to deal with conflicts instead of pulling a weapon. The family, mom, dad, the priests, the pastors, the teachers, everybody have to get these kids where they don't have the conflict that they're coming up with. You just can't blame a weapon, whether it's a knife, a hammer. The children they're not getting what they need to do from their homes and possibly from the churches, et cetera. That's where you need to go. I mean, I don't know what else to say with that. It's violent, and it is definitely being performed by very young people, and it needs to stop.
Thank you. Mr. Auksher?
Yeah, violent crime is defined by the FBI's Uniform Crime Report as including all of the things Mr. Jacobs was talking about, but also things like rape and kidnapping, burglary, strong-arm robbery are on that list. And so it isn't just crimes that involve weapons. There's actually some fairly good news about that, which is that violent crime has been decreasing for about 2 decades in a pretty steady way, which means we must have been doing something right. The exception to that is that we've had a spike in murders since the onset of the pandemic, and the rioting that has occurred in a few cities will certainly affect the data when that data comes to be available. But it's not right at the moment because the Uniform Crime Report and its statistics require about 2 years to compile. And so the most recent information that we have is really from about 2018. With that, the news is pretty good, which means that both law enforcement and social services, and possibly also things like the education establishment and the rehab community, have actually been doing a pretty good job of reducing violent crime. So I would say don't be deceived by the sensationalism of the evening news. As a matter of fact, violent crime is on the decrease, which means that we are doing what needs to be done for the most part.
Thank you. Next question is about Illinois pensions. The Illinois pension crisis refers to the rising gap between the pension benefits owed to eligible state employees and the amount of funding set aside to make these future pension payments. How should the legislature address the pension crisis? Mr. Auksher?
I think there's no question that there are a few cases here and there of people who are double dipping and drawing pensions that really take advantage of the system that was. but the vast majority of people who are drawing state pensions are doing exactly what they signed up for, and the state has to keep its word. The fact that the state has mismanaged the pension fund is not the fault of the state employees. I do think that pension reform is an option, but not reforming the pensions of those who are already part of the system. This has to be a long-term fix. I believe that we can change the conditions and the terms when people join the system as they become state employees. I'm a state employee. They gave me a choice when I came to Illinois as to whether to join the state system or to have my matching money paid from the university into a private 401k. I took the second one of those options, partly because this state is so badly mismanaged. And I believe that's a point that everybody's going to agree on, whether they're running for office or not. It's 100 years of mismanagement, but there's no reason to put that on the backs of people who have earned their pension. We have to fix this gradually, and the reform needs to happen at the point of entry into the system, not by taking away the benefits of those who have worked their entire careers in order to deserve, and we owe them those benefits. It's a contract. We must keep it.
Thank you. Mr. Jacobs?
Well, you hear a lot about pensions and what they need to do to fix them. What you need to do is find legislators that are willing to work on the pensions, and then who can honestly go to the people, the constituents that are recipients of those pensions, and honestly tell them what you need to do to fix it. I've been walking and talking through the district now for a long time, and I've heard everything that people have to say why you shouldn't change it. I have heard everything why you should change it. All have expressed the one common problem that comes up with the pension, and that is that it's not going to be there. They're very worried. I'd say 60 to 70% of the people have also expressed that they would be glad to do something now if it can make sure that they have their pensions forever. Now, the immediate scare, which is not being brought up much because everybody goes to the contract problem, but the immediate scare is that the federal bankruptcy laws possibly can come into play, probably will. Mitch McConnell, in the federal level, has to just make a few changes in the federal laws and bam, you can do bankruptcy. Worst thing that we can do to this state is bankrupt the pension system and the whole state. We don't want to do that. It's up to the state legislators to come up with a viable correction to the pension system. Look at everything. There's the talk of the constitutional amendment, talk of later retirement ages, also the tier hiring, also the SERS, the university systems, 401k equivalents. Those are all acceptable changes. Just remember, we are up against it, and there's not something we can do slowly. We have no choice but to change the pension system for its own solvency.
Thank you. Next one is about technology. How should the legislature be involved in addressing the so-called digital divide? That is the difference between urban and rural or low-income areas in their access to high-speed internet and other technology important to the 21st century. Mr. Jacobs?
Well, being in that divide out in Pomona, Illinois, we do not have Wi-Fi. That's why I'm sitting in town in Carbondale at a friend's office so that I could speak to you and have decent enough Wi-Fi that we could keep going for an hour. That's one place where tax dollars probably are going to be spent. The federal government has already spent a ton. The state of Illinois has spent a ton. It is absolutely essential. When I had the winery, we had no Wi-Fi there. We're trying to run business, run cash registers, run everything with Wi-Fi. It's absolutely essential. Tractors are running with GPS and Wi-Fi connections. Everything is connected today on internet, and without it, we're really at a disadvantage. And if it's in impoverished areas, if it's out in the countryside, it does have to be. We can't function without it, and we need to come up with ways to get it out there to everybody. Being part of it, and not having Wi-Fi where I live is it's hard not to be pretty much forced something to change it.
Thank you, Mr. Auksher.
I agree with everything Mr. Jacobs just said, and I want to add to it. I do think that Mr. Jacobs ought to come up with a way to finance that while also cutting taxes. I don't know how we can build our our technological infrastructure, which is an expensive project, and it definitely should be undertaken by the state. So I agree. Another thing that I want to add to this thought is not only is the world running on this, but it's going to be running on it for the future. One bright spot in the dark cloud of the pandemic is that because so many families in rural areas now have to find a way to get their children, and whether they're elementary school or high school age or even college age kids, online in order to continue school, and particularly federally mandated school attendance, it has generated in our state the political will for the first time to build the technological infrastructure that gets Wi-Fi, and it's not just Wi-Fi, but it's the technological infrastructure involves far more than just internet access. But we now have both the support programs, because you have to have an IT department, you have to have a help desk, you have to have people who can solve problems. And for the first time in the state's history, we actually have the political will to get those services out to the people so that their children can go to school. I would say we need to build on that political will, and we need to legislate what we're doing as a crisis move right at the moment. Legislate it and make it the standard practice.
Thank you. Okay, the next question, as several of our previous questions were submitted by listeners for voters that submitted them to us. So this one is about daylight savings time. Okay, so what is your position on the bill that was passed by the Senate last year to enact permanent daylight savings time? This person who submitted the question asks, would you favor permanent daylight savings time, permanent standard time, or continue as we have the twice yearly clock changes? I think we're at Mr. Auksher.
We discussed this a bit before the forum went live, and I, for one, would choose permanent standard time. However, I could live with permanent daylight time, but I like to get up at dawn. I like to get up at dawn every day, and that means I guess I sleep a little more in the winter. But I would say permanent daylight time, that's still going to have me getting up in the dark in the winter for no reason that I can figure out. And so I would prefer permanent standard time, which means I can pretty much keep getting up at dawn every day of the year. And that would make me very happy.
Thank you. And Mr. Jacobs, your opinion?
Yes. Well, number one, I get up at 5 o'clock. My clock goes off. I don't have an alarm. I just get up at 5 o'clock. Summer, winter, spring, fall, it's just the way it goes. But I think I'd like to have standard time just all the time. I think it's hard on me to change with the fall and the spring time changes. It's very difficult. It takes about a week or two to get used to it again. I could just go right on through the year with standard time.
All right, thank you. All right, the last question before you get to do your concluding remarks. This is a chance for you to bring up what you want to bring up. So this is the question. Please discuss any issue you would like to that has not already been discussed tonight, and tell us why it's important. So bring up something different, something you feel strongly about, and tell us why. Mr. Jacobs?
Well, I think, you know what I think? I think regulations are just really terrible. One of my favorite times was the last 25 years with my winery. 25 years ago, when we made 10,000 gallons of wine, we were taxed at 18 cents a gallon. We said, well, okay, we can do that. 18, we're good. Then it wasn't 7 years into it, and all of a sudden that tax went to 79 cents a gallon. So that 1,800 quickly on that 10,000 turned into $7,900. I didn't like that. The regulations and taxes are just, they get harder and harder. Then about 7 or 8 years ago, that same 79 cents went to $1.43. So the 10,000 gallons then turned into 14,000 gallons darn there. Yeah, so it was over 14,000 gallons. So 25 years ago, $1,800, and today, $14,000 in taxes. We have too much regulation. We have way too many taxes. We need to cut the taxes and then decide, once we get solvent, where to spend the money.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Oxer, what's your issue?
I would like to bring up the fact that I'm neither a Republican nor a Democrat, and that if you send a Republican or a Democrat to the state house, they'll be part of a caucus that likes to work in lockstep. Both sides do. I think I can go up there and listen to you and say what you think. I don't have to agree with anyone, because on your behalf, I can disagree with Michael Madigan, or I can disagree with the Republican leadership as it shifts through. I can also work with both sides without facing any negative consequences. I have a lot of ideas, and I'm looking for people who would want to work on those ideas. There's a second thing, which is I think that the person who serves as your state representative needs to use that office down in the district in order to bring together county boards, chambers of commerce, and to get people talking about what we share in common as a region and what we can do in terms of economic development, development of tourism, especially I would say the tourism, the ecotourism in our southern region, which I think is surely our future, to get some mass transportation down here so that our working people will have access to better jobs. I think a state representative can go from office to office and use that as a sort of a golden key to get into the Lions Club, the Kiwanis Club, the Chamber of Commerce, the Rotary Club, the TANs, and begin this conversation about how we can work together. So that's what I would like to do in the district, is spend my time going from town to town and office to office, making sure people talk about what we should be doing.
Thank you. And finally, you each will get 1 minute for your concluding remarks. Mr. Oxer.
I want to thank you in particular, and also Mr. Jacobs, and all of the people, Jennifer and Sandy and Jill, and all of the people who made this forum possible. I thank you for the invitation. I thank you for the excellent work that you do in encouraging people to cast an informed vote and to vote. And so that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing I want to do is say, I'm awfully pleased at the civility of this evening's conversation. I think I'm going to leave it at that.
Thank you. And Mr. Jacobs, think you get the last word.
Very good. I feel a lot of what Randy has said as far as developing down here in the South is exactly what you need to do. Myself, since I have been developing down here in the South with the winery and the tourism for 25 years, I think I'm very well qualified to do that part. But I want to thank, again, the Carbondale Library System, the League of Women Voters for the forum. I think it was done very well. You know, it's a difficult time to try to put an answer in a minute and a half. I think everybody would understand that. You know, but if anybody wants to hear more of what we were talking about, you know, they got a taste. But if they want to, call me, different topics, whatever, 618-534-3250. That's my personal phone. You can call it anytime. I will answer it, preferably not after 8 or before 8, but that's okay. I'm here to bring back the state. I want a balanced budget. I want to reduce expenditures, and I want to stop tax increases. Our pension system has to be fixed so that we can all enjoy our retirement and remain here in Illinois. Thank you again very much, everyone that has helped.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Oxer. Thank you, Mr. Jacobs, for that nice and civil exchange. I greatly appreciate it. I do want to say a few more things about voting before we leave tonight. Yes, vote, be informed. I want to say a couple of things about being sure that your vote counts. Like many of you, I have received a vote by mail ballot. It is being recommended that if you are going to return it by mail, do so by October 19th. We're not casting dispersions on anyone. We just want to get it in on time, October 19th, and that's a date to remember. One more thing about the vote by mail ballot that I did receive, I noticed there's something that needs to be emphasized. Just like when you vote in person, It is your signature that verifies who you are. That's the Illinois law. We do not require photo ID or anything else. It's our signature. So if you vote by mail, you have to make sure you affix your signature. You're going to need to look very, very carefully as to where that goes on the ballot certification piece of paper that will be in there. Be sure you look at the very bottom and put your signature there. Be sure you read all the materials if you do so choose to vote by mail. So please get out there and vote. Be informed voters. Thanks you all for coming tonight. Thank you for being informed voters. Take care. Good night. Thank you. Thanks for coming. Bye-bye.